Hello. This is part two of my interview with John Lott. I wanted to ask you about background checks because you have some amazing numbers on those.
Right. Look, everybody wants to stop bad people from getting guns, okay? The problem is that the current background check system is a complete mess, all right? Um, Biden or Democrats will say there's about 4 million dangerous or prohibited people now that have been stopped from buying guns since the beginning of the background check system went into effect. But that's false. What they should say is that there have been 4 million initial denials, and about 99% of those are mistakes. It's one thing to
Amazing.
stop a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because they have a roughly phonetically similar name and similar birthday to a prohibited person, somebody who's a felon. And the problem is, um, it looks like the mistakes are overwhelmingly involving Black and Hispanic males. People, so the problem is you're getting names confused with people who have similar names. All right.
Hmm. Hmm.
34% of Blacks have a felony record. 18% of Hispanics have these males have a felony record. 6% of white males have a felony record. About 3% of Asian males have a felony record. The problem is people tend to have names similar to others in their racial groups. Hispanics have names similar to other Hispanics. Blacks tend to have names similar to other Blacks. Given those high rates of people who are prohibited, the
Yes.
probability that you're going to run into a name that's similar and a birthday that's similar to somebody who's prohibited is pretty high for Black and
Yes.
Hispanic males. I could tell you a story when I was working in the Department of Justice. The deep state is real. I had so much trouble. One of the reasons why I took the job as senior advisor for research and statistics was to get the exact data on the error rates. I talked to people who had worked in the program before, and they had kind of confirmed this thing. So, just one other point before I get to that, and that is, you frequently hear, you know, uh, Republicans will attack Democrats for not enforcing gun control laws. Democrats will attack Republicans. Overwhelmingly, those numbers deal with these background checks. Okay, that's where almost all the cases. So you have 150,000 denials in one year and have 13 prosecutions and 6 convictions federally. And they'll just say, you're not enforcing the existing laws. If you talk to people who are actually involved in the process, uh, they'll tell you they'd be happy to enforce them. These are easy cases. The person, when they buy the gun and they sign the 4473, they're signing under threat of perjury,
Hmm.
whether they're a felon or not. So what are you going to do? You're going to say, I forgot I was in prison for 5 years or something like that? And even if you did claim you forgot, it's not going to be a very useful defense. These are very easy cases to prosecute, and yet they don't prosecute them because they're not real cases. But if you want, I can give you a
Wait,
short
on
5 minutes.
that, I wanted to ask about that. I've always wondered, and I mean, this is, I guess, a good thing about background checks. What felon, knowing he has a felony record, would go in and submit his name for the background check? Isn't just having the background check, even if it's BS, even if it's like one of these cameras on a house that doesn't actually take a video of anything, just having them have to submit their names and sign this thing under penalty of perjury, if you're a felon,
And these,
not going
these
to try to buy a gun.
these guys may not be the sharpest knives in the drawer, but they're not that stupid that they go in and know that they're not going to be able to pass a criminal background check that's there. And they don't do it. Now, there are lots of ways for criminals to get guns. One of the big sources for illegal guns are drug dealers. I mean, drug dealers have a lot of guns. It's not like they can go to the police and say, this other gang stole our drugs. Can you help us get them back? They have very valuable property that's there, and they need to set up their own little militaries in order to protect that. So if they can make money selling drugs or they can make money selling guns, they're going to do that. I mean, you look at a country like Mexico. Mexico, since 1972, has had one gun store in the country. The most powerful gun that you've been able to legally buy since 1972 is a 22 caliber short round bolt action rifle. That's not the type of gun that gun drug gangs are using in Mexico, and yet Mexico's murder rate more than doubled since that law went into effect. And in many recent years, they've had a murder rate that's as high as 6 times higher than the murder rate that we have in the United States. Um, and it's the drug gangs get a hold of guns, just as they bring in drugs from around the rest of the world. They also steal a lot from the Mexican military and stuff.
Mhm.
But um,
How do criminals in this country, I don't know if you have a breakdown on it, but I've always wondered, um, yes, they can get it the same way they get drugs, but presumably a fair number of them are stolen. And I guess a fair number of them are bought by straw purchasers, i.e., the criminal's girlfriend will go in, look over the guns. Yeah, get this one, honey. And we don't prosecute straw purchasers. I think we should. But I'm wondering if you have any numbers on what the breakdown is on percentage of criminals using stolen guns traded or brought in the same way they get their guns or their drugs brought in, and straw purchasers.
well, I've looked a little bit at stolen guns. I really don't think that there's much going on there as much as people seem to claim. There's a survey done by the Bureau of Justice Statistics every few years asking criminals who are in prison where they obtain their guns. One thing
Hmm.
is clear, it's less than 1% that claim they get them from gun shows or flea markets. It's a very tiny percent that's there. Most of them get it from buying it off the street, which isn't very clear. My own guess is that most of those are drug gang. Look, I think it's about as difficult to stop criminals from obtaining guns as it is to stop them from obtaining illegal drugs.
Yes.
And and one of the problems that you have is that people look at where they've gotten the guns, right now. And even if I were to go and somehow, cause, let's say, gun shows to disappear, they'd find some other way to go and get that 1% that they go and get
Mhm.
it from there. Or, straw purchases would disappear. I just, there's too much at stake for drug dealers to protect the very valuable property that they have there, not to have weapons. So if I could click my fingers and cause all illegal drugs to disappear from the United States and all guns, how long do you think it would be before illegal drugs started coming back in? If you're in El
Right.
Paso, 20 minutes? And 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 how long would it be before they bring in the weapons to protect that very valuable property that's there? If you
Hmm.
want to if you want to go and reduce that pipeline, that market that's there, that would be there, I think you need to start talking about how we deal with illegal drugs. But that's another conversation that's there.
One thing I want you to explain to me, it's all the rage right now, and I don't really understand it, and I'm not sure I like it, is constitutional carry.
Right. Well, I've kind of changed. Look, I have different views on it. I think there are pluses and there are minuses on it, like with almost everything in life.
Hmm.
Um, one of the things that I think has created the impetus in the last couple of years for constitutional carry was COVID, and the fact that in over 20 states, for long periods of time, they basically shut down
Oh,
issuing more concealed carry permits that were there.
that's right.
So we had increases in violent crime. People felt, geez, I need to be able to protect myself. And they found, guess what? The process is closed. You can't, if you don't already have a permit, you're out of luck. Okay.
Hmm.
In some places, it could be a year or so delay, actually, that they had, in others, 6 months or whatever. Um,
But
and
it's basically, explain what it is. You still have to get, at least at the moment, you still have to go through your federal background check. If you're getting a gun for the first time. You still have to abide by any state requirements that you go through the training. Don't all states require a gun shop to sign off on the fact that you know how to use a gun?
not really. I mean, look, uh, so here, I mean, even with concealed carry permits, uh,
Mhm.
about half the states don't require any training to be able to go and get it. What you do to get a concealed carry permit in those states is you have to be a certain age, you have to
Mhm.
pass a criminal background check, uh, and you have to pay your fee to be able to go and obtain it. Um, I've looked across the states, and I don't see any difference in terms of revocation rates for states that require training or states that don't. One of the things you do
Oh, that's
see,
interesting. Yeah.
look, you're talking about law-abiding citizens going and get
Right.
these permits. They
And
know,
what's the point of getting the permit if you don't know how to use the thing you've just gotten a permit for? So I guess that does make some intuitive sense.
right? Look, I have data for two states, Idaho and Kansas, on people going and getting training before and after they move from these concealed carry permits to constitutional carry. Maybe I should just explain what constitutional carry is. Basically,
Mhm.
if you're able to legally own a gun and you're not involved in some other type of crime, then you're allowed to go and carry the gun for protection. You're able to carry concealed or open or both, depending upon the state that you're in.
Mhm.
Uh, the big, what you find though is a lot more people are, I believe, are carrying when you move to constitutional carry. And in Idaho and Kansas, there were big 20-25% increases in people getting training after they move to constitutional carry. One of the things that you see also is changing of the training. When you get politicians going and setting up what the required training is, they put in all sorts of nutty stuff. If you're in a state like California, they're going to spend like 2 hours telling you how to store your guns. Okay, most people probably, but most of it is just indoctrination to try to scare people by exaggerating the risks of having guns in the home. And it's just they
Mhm.
use every Oregon right now is having this uh, licensing and registration rules in effect, and I just testified there recently, or tried to, and the
Yeah.
um, and you read it and all the stuff that they have there. It's just they want to have one lecture after another about why you shouldn't own guns. So anyway, what happens is that when you have kind of the market there set up and the trainers are responding to the market conditions there. What people want to know is what rules do I have to follow so as not to become a felon myself? What do I
Mhm.
have to know to be able to adequately protect myself? And so the classes tend to be much shorter, they tend to be less expensive, but I believe they tend to be more effective in making people properly be able to go and carry guns without getting into problems and doing it correctly. Look,
Mhm.
one of the benefits of having concealed carry permits is that I can answer a question that comes up all the time by gun control people, and that is the claims that these permit holders are dangerous. Okay, you have groups like the Violence Policy Center, which makes bizarre counts, like quadruple counting some data that I could explain on the number of crimes committed by permit holders. And I said, look, even if you accept their nutty count of this, you have to realize we have over 22 million Americans with concealed carry permits. It's still like a micro fraction. You're talking about thousands of a percentage point or tens of thousands for the
Mhm.
numbers that they
Mhm.
have. And one thing that's interesting that I can point out is that police are rarely convicted of firearms related violations. They're convicted at about 1/20th the rate of the general population. But permit holders, concealed carry permit holders, are convicted at about 1/12th the rate that police are. You bring up things
Wow.
like that, it makes it hard for them to do it. Now, I can't do that with constitutional carry because I don't know the denominator there. I don't know how many people are legally carrying there. You may have a survey or something like that, but people are often reticent to go and answer those things correctly. And you can think of biases that could go either way on those types of
Mhm.
survey questions. So, but uh, here are the benefits that I think from constitutional carry. So not being able to engage in that part of the debate that I was just explaining is a cost. Okay, um, the benefit side is, let's say you have a woman who's being stalked or threatened. All right, uh, you look at these states. Often it's 2 months, 3 months.
Yeah.
In parts of Connecticut, it's a year to get your permit that's there. Even
Mhm.
a month, even a couple
Yes.
weeks might be too long for that woman to wait to be able to go and protect herself there. Well, with
Yes.
constitutional carry, you don't have that problem. she's able to immediately go and carry for her protection. The other issue that you have are the costs. If my research convinces me of anything, it's basically the people who are most likely victims of violent crime who benefit the most from having the option to be able to go and protect themselves. And that's overwhelmingly one group of people. It's poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas. The crime
Mhm.
rate against them is astronomical in many of these places. And, you know, you go to, I'll give you a comparison. In
Mhm.
Illinois, about 4% of the adult population has a concealed carry permit. In neighboring Indiana, it's over 22%. Why the difference
Wow.
between the two? In Illinois, it costs about $450 to go through the process to go and get a concealed carry permit when you add the cost of the license and the training that's there. In Indiana, it's zero now. Okay. You don't have to pay anything. They'll go and give you the license when you apply for it. And there's no mandatory training that's there. And so, but it's more than just the percent of the population that's affected there. You have a huge impact on the demographics of who get it. And so in
Yes.
Illinois, it's basically wealthy people who live in the suburbs. Now, is it fine that wealthy people who live in the suburbs can protect themselves? Sure. But they're not the likely victims of violent crime. Okay. And
Yeah.
so you could have 100% of the people in areas where there's no violent crime carrying, and you're not going to have any impact on violent crime rates that's there. Where it
Mhm.
matters is having it so that where the criminals attack to make it risky for the criminals who are actually committing the crimes to go and do that. And so in
Mhm.
Indiana, you see zip codes, which are heavily minority, very poor zip codes, where you have a fair number of concealed carry permits that are issued there. And so, you know, um, my
Has the
argument,
percentage of Americans owning guns, buying guns, I assume it has gone up significantly in the last few years with the crime rate going through the roof and the BLM riots and Antifa riots. I mean, just from people I've talked to, particularly um, women who live in nice, wealthy areas and don't really need a gun, but a lot of people are talking about getting guns now.
they want to have the option just in case something happens in the future. But look,
Hmm.
no, I think there's a lot of evidence that there, over the last decade, you've seen a sea change in women's views on guns and also blacks. You now have a majority of both groups that are, believe that guns are useful for protection. I wish it was even higher because those are
Hmm.
the very groups that, as I say, who I think benefit the most. But you look at
Hmm.
these laws that get passed, like these universal background checks on private transfers of guns. Let's say you have a woman friend of
Oh, yeah, will
yours.
you explain that, please? Because I'm constantly arguing with people who say, "Oh no, we need universal background checks," and right now, I gather it's like 99%, very close to universal. But they're only
Oh,
talking. Explain what they're talking about. That it is not part of what we have now.
okay. So right now, in all the states, and this has been true since 1994, if you go to a licensed gun dealer, you have to
Mhm.
go through a federal background check that's going to be there. Okay. And what they want to do now is that for any sale or transfer between private individuals or what have you, they would want to have a background check record. Um, and there's a reason why I think that they want to do it. Because I've been telling gun control advocates for over 20 years that they could get this passed tomorrow if they just were willing to make a few reasonable, I mean, they talk about reasonable gun control, a few reasonable changes. So I'll give you one reasonable change, and that is
Mhm.
we were talking before about the error rates. If private companies had an error rate on background checks for employees that was 100th the error rate that the federal government has, they'd be sued out of existence under federal law. My reasonable change is to have the federal government have to meet the same standards for doing background checks that the federal government requires that private companies have to meet when they do background checks. But
Yes.
gun control people will fight you tooth and nail on that. I mean, if you were to go to a private employer and say, I think you ought to look at roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays for doing background checks, they will look at you like you're from Mars because they know there'll be all sorts of errors there and they know it will be discriminatory. I've gone to Democrats on the Hill without talking about background checks on guns. I did this a decade or so ago and just say, I think these background checks that regulations we have on private companies are too strict. I think we may let some people through the net. We ought to just look at roughly phonetically similar names, and they'll look at you like you're nuts. And they'll immediately start talking about the discriminatory aspects of it. So that's one, what I call reasonable change. The other reasonable change is just the cost. So whether voting on this in Washington, D.C., it costs $125 to do a background check on a private transfer of a gun. And just to give you an idea how these are set up, and let's say you and I lived in Washington, D.C., and I'm going to give Ann 4 guns. You think it's just John giving Ann 4 guns? It should just be one background check because one person is getting all the guns that are there. But no, they require under law, and the other states generally do this too, that you have to have a separate background check on each gun. So rather than it costing $125, it costs $500 for us to do that. Now, give me a rational explanation for why you should have to have a separate background check on each gun that's transferred. It's obvious the only reason why they're doing it is to make it costly for people to be able to go and obtain guns. And so here's my thing. Look, if you believe that these background checks reduce crime, and I don't, okay, but I'm very skeptical. But let's say you do. You want to encourage people to go and do these background checks, right? You want to encourage them to go out of their way to do this. Well, is taxing them $125 to go and do that, encouraging people to do it? Do we normally tax people for things we want to encourage them to do? I would say, nah, that's not the way we normally do it. The other thing is, if you believe it reduces crime, it reduces crime for everybody, not just the individual who's going out of their way to go and obey the law that's there. Well, as an economist, I would say whoever benefits from this government action should be the ones who pay for it. If everybody benefits, then everybody should pay. You should pay for it out of general revenue for both of these things. And so I've gone to gun control advocates for over 20 years. And I say, look, I'll write you an op-ed piece with you. If you will agree to a couple reasonable changes, one, we have this change in the background check rules so that they have to meet the same standards that private companies have to meet. And we pay for these background checks out of general revenue. I mean, you think these are beneficial, okay? And that they benefit everybody. So let's let everybody pay for this out of general revenue. And they refuse. They will not, I can't get anybody to go and do that. And that's just convinced me over time that they really don't care about the background checks per se. What they care about are things to make it difficult, costly as they can for people to be able to go and obtain guns. And and the main reason why I think they're pushing these universal background checks are twofold. One, to make it costly and difficult for people to get guns. But two, the other thing is to create a national gun registry. The beginning of last year, it was reported that Biden had basically created a computer database with almost 1 billion purchases of guns over recent decades. But they don't have everything there because they don't have all the private transfers of guns that are there.
Wait,
and so
I
by
thought
having
that the FBI background check, I was assured that yes, they do the background check, but no one is keeping your name.
Okay, so
Keeping my
federal
name.
law, right? No, you're right. I'll tell you what these guys think they're very smart in getting around the rules, the law that's there. The original Brady Act required that within 24 hours after a background check was completed, that information had to be deleted. All right, so that now Obama violated that many times. They found that they were keeping it for years, and finally they had to get that purged. But what's happened under the Biden administration? So what they've done is when FFLs have gone out of business, they have to keep their records for 20 years. They turn them over to the ATF, and the ATF has been digitizing all that information that's there. But what they've also been doing is contacting FFLs and asking them to turn in their current lists that are there. And some FFLs have done that. So, in fact, a lot apparently have been doing that. But
Wow.
but what they've done is they say we've never used this to actually check on whether somebody has a gun or not. So they haven't fed. They have a computer database with all these things, but they say if their reading of the law is as long as they don't actually use it to go and check whether somebody has it, then it's legal for them to have created this computerized database that's there. And so
So to know if they have my name, I'd have to check with whomever I bought a gun from, the federally licensed gun dealer, and see if they've turned it over.
well, I mean, if the gun dealer has probably gone out of business in the last 10 or 15 years, it's very likely that your name is in the database that's there.
No, I'm
If
on that.
you,
I don't think my guys would turn over my name.
well, if they've gone out of business, they don't have a choice. They turn
Right.
it over. And
That's
I would,
outrageous.
yeah, well, uh, it hasn't gotten the attention that it should get. But, look, you just had a situation in Connecticut where in 2013, after Sandy Hook, they passed a gun registration law and they promised everybody that their guns would be grandfathered in and everything. And now the current governor is saying, it's great we have this because now we know who has these bad guns. And he's been pushing very hard for legislation to, now that they have this list, to know who to take the guns away from.
What
California, New
purpose
York,
of registration is there other than some, whether they do it immediately or David Dinkins comes in a few years later, he did it, and a new government comes in and says we're going to take the guns away. What possible conceivable purpose is there for the government keeping a list of everyone who has a gun other than to take them away?
all right. The claim is, and it's a bogus claim, but the claim that they use is that it helps them solve crime. And the reason why they claim that it helps them solve crime is that if a gun is used in a crime and it's left at the crime scene and it's registered to the person who committed the crime, then in theory, you can trace it back to the criminal. The problem is crime guns are virtually never left at the crime scene. And the few times that they are, and the few times that they are left at the crime scene, they're left there because the criminal's been either killed or seriously wounded, so you've caught them anyway. And in the couple times that they are registered, they're not registered to the person who committed the crime. And the once or
Mhm.
twice that anyway, it just the thing is, we have lots of places around the world, country, and the world that have had registration and licensing. Hawaii's had registration and licensing since 1960. I testified a while ago before the Hawaii legislature about changes that they wanted to have. Give me an excuse to go to Hawaii. Uh, about changes they wanted to have in the registration and licensing rules that they had there. And
Mhm.
before I went there, I was told that the Honolulu police chief was going to testify for the bill. And I told the legislators that were inviting me, look, you got to tell him in advance that there are two questions that you're going to ask, okay? Because I don't want him to be sandbagged. I don't want him to say he can't answer the questions. I want you to give him plenty of advance notice so he has to answer them. One question is, since 1960, how many crimes have you been able to solve as a result of registration and licensing? The second question is, how much does it cost each year to go and run the registration and licensing program in Honolulu? Well,
Mhm.
when he testified, he said he couldn't find one single crime that they've been able to solve as a result of registration and licensing. And he also said that it took about, he didn't have a dollar amount, but he said it took about 50,000 hours of police time each year to go and run the licensing and registration program that was there. That's
Wow.
50,000 hours with the police time that we're putting into something that didn't solve any crimes that we know could be used to go, and we know there are lots of types of policing that works. I mean, if they
Mhm.
could point to thousands of crimes that they've been able to solve, or hundreds, or at least a couple dozen, or three, at least there'd be some discussion of trade offs that were there. but 50,000 hours with police time is a lot. New York and Maryland have had a registration, licensing, and ballistic fingerprinting set up for 15 years each. Uh, New York spent well over $40 million in the 15 years. Maryland, just on their computer, spent over $5 million. I don't know what their total expenses were, but um, uh, neither state, after 15 years, could point to one single crime that they'd been able to solve as a result of this expensive system. So that's over
Mhm.
$40 million that you could have spent on other types of policing that we know would
Yeah,
have made some difference that's there. So,
yeah.
that's a really big loss. So even the gun control crazies in New York and Maryland said, uh, I know the gun control people are saying, oh, we need more time, 15 years. You just need to go, maybe it's 25 years or something. Then we'll come across some crime that we'll be able to solve. We just need more time. 15 years wasn't enough. But they weren't able to convince even the strong gun control advocates in those states to keep the program going. It was just one way to make it more costly for people to be able to go and have guns. So, um, uh, you know, so anyway, that's the claim, and I can go and
So to
talk
go
about.
back to what I've been hearing on MSNBC about how the Democrats want to save children from being mowed down by guns, and Republicans apparently don't mind that. How often, I mean, I've seen various numbers on this. I'm sure you have lots of interesting numbers on it. How often are guns, concealed, constitutional carry, or otherwise, used to avert a crime? And can you break down how often the gun is just shown, scaring the guy off, versus actually being shot? And my favorite category, shooting and killing the criminal.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, there are different types of numbers and different quality that we have for these types of things. Um, we have surveys that look at defensive gun use as generally, doesn't usually break it down by whether it's concealed carry or not. And
Mm.
what you find is that maybe most recent numbers are about 1.6 million, 1.7 million. The average, if you take surveys over a longer period of time, are closer to 2 million defensive gun uses. The best estimates that we have
Per year. That's
indicate
2 million per year.
right per year. And
Hmm.
so I would just generally say people use guns defensively maybe about 5 times more frequently each year to stop crime than guns are used in the commission of crime. Um, about We did a deep dive on media coverage of defensive gun uses during 2021. And what you find is that nationwide there's about 2,000 news stories on defensive gun uses. Most of those involve instances where people have been killed. About 42% of them involve instances where the attacker's been wounded. And about 4% of them involve instances where simple brandishing of guns occurred. The
Hmm.
surveys, on the other hand, indicate that about 95% of the time, simply brandishing a gun is what's used defensively. And so, I understand if I have a dead body on the ground, or I have a woman, let's say, who's brandished a gun, the criminals run away, no shots are fired, no dead body on the ground. You're not even sure what crime would have been committed.
Hmm.
You or I, if we were editors of news bureaus, would say, this story of the dead body on the ground is a lot more newsworthy for people than this woman where we don't even know what crime would have been committed. So you don't
Hmm.
need any conspiracy story to understand, if it bleeds, it leads type
Hmm.
stuff there. Now, we may understand that from a newsworthiness perspective, but in terms of policy, in terms of what makes people safer, we care about both types of cases, whether it's newsworthy or not.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it has a big impact, the lack of news media coverage. But I'll just mention a couple other things. We know only about 22% of violent crimes are reported to police. All right,
Wait,
uh,
what percent
22% of
of
violent
violent crimes?
crime are reported to police. And
What, you get attacked and just, I'll go sleep it off.
you know, um, it has to do with lots of things. Part of it it has to do with whether people think police will be able to solve the crime or not,
Oh.
and and also, I may be harmed, but do I really want to go and spend all the time to do it? A lot of people who have gone through violent crime is very heavily concentrated in tiny areas in our country.
Mhm.
So you have about for murders, about 1% of the counties account for 43% of the murders. 2% of the counties account for 56% of the murders that are there. And if you look at those
Wow.
2% of the counties, about almost 2/3 of their murders take place within 10-block areas within those counties. So murders in the United States and violent crime generally is very heavily concentrated. And so what happens is
And
that
so this suggests that it isn't America's cowboy gun culture, since the
right,
cowboy gun culture is everywhere, permeates. It's
well,
not in tiny little counties, but all of this violent crime and the shootings is going on in what, 2% of the counties, did you
right,
say?
right. I mean, those 2% of the counties make up over 20% of the population, but they make up over 56% of the murders that are there. And as I say, if you really want to make a population comparison, you look at what's the population for those 10-block areas where they're having even most of their murders, which would be just a tiny fraction of that.
Mhm.
Over half the counties have zero murders. About
Oh,
70% of the counties, another almost 20% have just one murder. So about 70% of the counties in the United States have either zero or one murder that's occurred. And um, so murder is not an American problem. A murder is a problem that occurs in very tiny areas within the United States. Um,
mhm.
but the point I was trying to make is that um, a lot of crime victims have been victims of violent crime multiple times. And they may have learned kind of through experience what the success rate of going through the police are and what the amount of time that's involved in the process. So I may be
Mhm.
assaulted for like the third or fourth time. And I may say, I may have gone the first time or something like that, but I'm not going to go again. It's just, I'll recover and it'll be okay. You know, so, I mean, I have to confess, one time I had a violent crime. I had somebody attack me when I was living near Washington, D.C. And I, I spent a huge amount of time talking to the police. And it was like nothing happened. So, I mean, I can
Right.
understand why,
Well, in
people,
Chicago, the clearance rate on murder is so low. It's like 17%, 20%. Murder is basically legal in Chicago. The odds of your getting caught, convicted, sent to prison are vanishingly small. They've basically legalized murder.
yeah, and it's changed a lot over time. When Mayor Daley, the younger, took office, the clearance rate was about 67%. When he
Wow.
left, it was down to 30%. When Rahm Emanuel left office, it was down to about 20%. And it's gone into the teens in some years. I think 2 years ago it kind of is back up to about 20%, but it's bounced around there. And a clearance rate just means arrest. They've also had problems convicting a number of people. But a little bit over a year ago, there was an example that you had two rival drug gangs fighting against each other at 11 a.m. in the morning in broad daylight. It's caught on high definition video. One person was killed, two people were seriously injured and sent to the hospital. Um, uh, Kim Foxx's office initially decided that since it was, quote, mutually agreed to combat, that they weren't going to prosecute them. There was such a blowback from that. Even Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who used to be a prosecutor, uh, even for her, that was too much. Because not only did they have high definition video of these people shooting these guns, they actually had police on the scene there witnessing the shots being fired and being able to identify the people. And, anyway, they end up saying, well, we just don't have enough evidence to go after them. And Mary Laura Lightfoot said, when she was a prosecutor, this would have been a slam dunk case. It's just, these Soros prosecutors just kind of look for reasons not to go and prosecute people
Yes.
if they're not of the right race or whatever they want to go and break it down by. So,
Hmm.
and the problem is who are the victims of these crimes? The victims of these crimes, they claim that they care about blacks. They
Yes.
claim that they care about Hispanics. But the thing is, about 90% of murders by blacks are of other blacks.
Yes.
But you have a similar percentage for Hispanics. And so, it's people tend to commit crimes, all sorts of violent crimes against similar people, similar incomes. And so the thing is, it's not just the losses from the crime. So that's horrific. Okay. In addition to that, what businesses close down? Who owns many of those
Yes.
businesses? Who works in those stores? Who shops in the stores that get closed down? Who owns
Yes.
houses in those areas whose property value is depressed by the higher crime rates that are there? These are
Mhm.
minority areas. So they go and they claim that they care about these people, but the only people that they really care about are the violent criminals that they
Yes.
don't want to go and punish. They don't care about the many, 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 many more numerous victims who are either the direct or indirect victims of these violent crimes that are there.
And they make it more and more expensive for them to be able to defend themselves. I feel so sorry for law-abiding Black people living in these neighborhoods. $400 to get your gun license or to do your training. No, and as you've illustrated,
Chicago went even further.
get the
For a number
press.
of years, they
Mhm.
wouldn't even allow a training facility in Chicago. You couldn't go and carry a permanent concealed handgun. Still can on public transportation. So let's say you were a poor black who lived in
Yes.
Chicago and you were willing to pay the over $400 to go pay for the license and the training. You had to go well outside the city, 16 hours of training, which basically meant you had to either go for 2 or usually 4 days of training. And so if you didn't own a car, and a lot of them
Right.
don't own cars, you have to go and borrow somebody's car to be able to go and travel outside the city for 4 days that are there. And, it's kind of like they went through the whole laundry list: high costs, don't allow training facilities nearby, make it so that you can't easily get to these places. It's kind of like they purposely went through the whole list to say, what can we do to prevent poor blacks from being able to go and defend themselves? And the
Yes.
Democrats claim that these are the people that they care about.
Yep.
So
Nope.
it's just
They
in
they
Oregon,
just like the criminals.
in Oregon, the new this bill that they have, it would make it $150 to apply for a permit. Okay, you'd have to go and get training. My own guess is the most conservative estimate that I have for the training cost is like $200. It could be significantly higher. So you're talking about $350, $400, maybe more total cost that's there. And
Mhm.
on top of that, let's say you want to get a concealed carry permit. Well, they just last year doubled the cost of getting a concealed carry permit. Using my most conservative estimates, you're talking about $500 for
Yep.
somebody to go and get a concealed carry permit to obtain a gun and then get a permit. Who do they
Yeah.
think they're stopping from being
Yeah.
able to go and protect themselves? Do they
Yeah.
think that they're stopping wealthy individuals who live in the suburbs from being able to do that? No. The people that they'll stop some of them, but they're primarily stopping the people that my research indicates who benefit the most: poor people, the people who are most likely
Yes.
victims of violent crime.
Yes. No, your research really makes that very clear. And I encourage everyone to go to crimeresearch.org. I've held you for more than an hour. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Your statistics, your research, it's always where you have to go if you want to know anything about guns. And I'd love to have you back on because I had more questions for you, and also to ask you about some of your research on other topics, which is always
Women
fascinating.
voting or something like that.
Yeah. Why, yes.
And you wonder
Uh,
you wonder why they like me so much sometimes.
and girl policemen. Well,
Yeah, okay.
also this the whole gun debate. I was thinking of it watching this stuff about Nashville. It's custom made for liberals who are instinctively drama queens, and they can wail about the children. That's why I keep asking you. Now, is our position that we want more dead children? No, John Lott, I think proves what over and over and over again what works with
Well,
with
they just
stuff.
have to read the diaries and manifestos. You would think it's newsworthy to
Yeah,
report once in a while on why these mass murders picked the target that they did. Give me somebody give me a newsworthiness rationale for why that's not newsworthy.
right.
I won't you will look in vain. Even this last week, you will New York Times, Washington Post, Fox, people refuse to go and report on why, that this person passed two other targets that were there,
Right.
at least one other target.
They haven't even released the full manifesto yet, right?
Well, and that's unusual. Usually these manifestos get out like within a day or something
Yeah.
like that. And but uh, the Biden administration took possession of the manifesto. The FBI has it. Who knows when they're going to do it? But
Oh.
I have to tell you, I,
Wait, how did they have the right to take it? How is this an interstate crime?
I,
It's a crime on in one state, in one town. Why didn't the police say no? Thanks for your help, but this is our investigation.
well, it's a very liberal. Nashville is a very liberal city. I have no idea, but I have to tell you, I've worked in the federal government twice, and each time I've worked there, it's confirmed my worst fears about the federal government. We could just do a show on stories about what it was like to work in those places, but it just um, uh, the deep state is real. I'm amazed that Trump was able to accomplish even half the things that he was able to do while he was in office. But he made a lot of
Let's
big
see
mistakes.
what President DeSantis does.
Right. Well, look, I think DeSantis would be an look. The biggest problem, well, or maybe not the biggest, but one of the big problems that Trump had was he wasn't good at appointing people to different positions. And so in the Department of Justice, I don't know how many times I was told this, but when Trump came in as an olive branch to the Bushes, he let George W. Bush appoint pretty much everybody in the Department of Justice. He let Jeb Bush appoint pretty much everybody in the Department of Education. I have to tell you, I was just stunned by how many political appointees in the Department of Justice hated Trump, just
Yes,
hated him. So one of the
yes.
reasons why they finally brought me in was there was a guy named David Mulhausen who was the director of the National Institute of Justice. During
Mhm.
his first 3 years there, he had given out 45% more money for firearms research studies than the last 3 years of the Obama administration. And every single dollar went to left wing gun control people.
Wow.
And, and um, you know,
Do they actually do research? I thought they just had slogans and screamed about the
well,
children,
they
the
do bad
children.
research. You and I could talk about that for weeks. Uh, I could do a semester class on it. I've written a couple books.
That
But
would be
anyway,
great.
and I can talk. I'll give you one. I don't want to keep you, but I'll give you one example. So while I was there, he was putting out a new request for funding for the following year, and for firearms studies. And just give you an example from one sentence. He
Mhm.
wanted to go and study how the elimination of gun-free zones would increase firearm homicides. And I said, David, why not just say increase or decrease? I mean, why just look at whether it would increase? Isn't that a little
Yeah.
bit of a bias? And his response to me is, John, you're just an ideologue, you know, and stuck on this. And I was saying, look, there's so many other problems with just this one sentence. So you want to look at firearm homicides. Well, what about non-firearm homicides? Let's say you pass a law that lowers firearm homicides but increases total homicides.
Mhm.
Wouldn't that be still bad? Do you want to go? Wouldn't that maybe be worse? Don't we care about what happens to total homicides? And then I said, why even look at homicides? I know that's what the public health people want to do all the time. Most people don't understand. I mean, you're a lawyer. I'm sure you understand the difference between homicides and murders. Homicides are murders plus justifiable homicides.
Mhm.
it's never been really obvious to me why you want to lump together
Yes.
murders and justifiable homicides. They're both
Yes,
not
self-defense.
equally
Right.
bad. If a woman has to fatally shoot a rapist that breaks into her home at 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm not as upset about that as I am about a robber going in killing somebody that he's trying to rob, or a rapist who kills
Yes.
the victim in that case. And
Point.
but you know, all I can tell you is I got nothing there changed in that one sentence, and I got nothing changed in anything else that I made comments on. And um, so it was, as I say, it was just kind of the thing is, so not only are you battling kind of the staff, which are just like
Yes.
really left wing ideologues,
Mhm.
particularly in the data part of the FBI. I can't say beyond that, but those are the people I had interactions with. But it was even the political appointees you were
Mhm.
battling. There was talk about removing him, but my understanding, I never had a conversation directly with him on this, but talking to other people, that if they removed him before the election, he was threatening to go to the media and attack Trump for being anti-science. And so, but the thing is, so you have all the
It
you
kinda
know
was.
all these leaks and everything else that was occurring. Rosenstein,
Mhm.
he was a Bush guy, so it's some of the stuff that was going on there. It Trump, and the thing is, as far as I can tell, he bought no goodwill from George W. Bush or Jeb
Right.
Bush. Uh,
Right.
and
Nor
Biden,
even from his daughter and son-in-law, or from Gary Cohn or the other hideous people he he brought on, or the groups he appealed to. I mean, when he was bragging at the first debate about letting people out of jail, thinking that was going to appeal to African Americans. It's insulting that you even think that. And B, we're in the middle of a crime surge and you're attacking Joe Biden for being too tough on crime. No, his administration was a disaster from beginning to end. If only it had ended with the campaign and his winning and then ended. We
well,
would have been much better off. The campaign
you and
was
I
excellent.
can talk off air more about that stuff, but I'm sure we have a lot of
No, I'm
agreement
going to
on
bring you back because we have a lot to talk about, and really, you can't trust the media. They lie about these things. It's
it. It's
stunning the
just
way they.
amazing to me. I,
Mhm.
I, you know, I just go give a couple things. How many people know that less than 8% of violent crime involves guns? I think almost nobody knows that. I know it. People
Huh.
that deal with data know that. Uh, they
What
talk
is
about this
included? What is included in violent crime?
murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault.
Okay, so I guess asking for your
Well,
money.
very few rapes involve guns. Almost no rapes
Yeah,
involve
yeah.
guns. And you may have, I mean, most
Robbery.
murders involve guns, but most aggravated assaults don't involve guns. Aggravated assaults are the largest portion of violent crime.
And that's fists and
I'll
knives.
tell you one funny thing. So if you break it down by education, the people who are
Mhm.
most in error are the people who went to graduate school. The
Oh
people
yeah,
who are
yeah, yeah.
most
What is from it?
the people who are most accurate in guessing the percent of violent crime are people who have a high school education or less. And I
Yeah,
think a
and
lot of
probably
it is
less.
because they
Yeah,
experience violent crime, and
right.
so they know firsthand that a lot of violent crime doesn't involve guns. But the
Yeah.
people who went to graduate school, they got it from their classes, or they just watch the news all the time, and they depend upon the news somehow being accurate for this stuff.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes. The reason you can trust John Lott is because no one will debate him. All they do is defame him, attack him, call him names. It's much like the people who thought children shouldn't get vaccinated, or maybe masks don't work. Whenever one of my friends, you'll be glad to hear this, but then I really will let you go. He was very liberal, but he so hated the COVID shutdowns and the masking and this not being based on anything, and mostly just the uniformity of it's the science, and anyone who disagrees being shut down and censored. And I saw him during the whole COVID thing, and he said, "I now realize global warming is a hoax." Because it's the
Yes.
exact same thing. They shut down debate. They say scientists are unanimous. Whenever they shut down debate, that you know who's telling the truth and who hasn't. And no liberal will debate John Lott on guns. So thank you, John Lott, and everyone should go to crimeresearch.org.
Unsafe. Unsafe. Every fact and culture states got every lib out there feeling unsafe.